Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FA Live. My name is Caitlin Brower. I am your host of FA Live, and I'm also First Advantage's Director of Public Relations, Social Media, and Events. So I'm excited today. I've got two rock stars with me right above me here. We've got Marlus and Ryan joining me. So very excited to, Marlus is our SVP and Head of LATAM here at First Advantage. And then Ryan is our Vice President of Compliance for the Americas. So I'm going to give them a second to introduce themselves. But before we get started, I wanted to dive a little deep into the episode we have. As you can see on the bottom, that's what our title is here today. And we're going to dive into the recent U.S. Treasury sanctions against several Latin American financial institutions and what this means for risk management in the financial sector. So we're going to share more on this latest news and what actions these institutions can do to safeguard the organization so this doesn't happen to them. Marlus, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of FA Live. So I'm going to give you again now a moment to introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your roles here at First Advantage. So Marlus, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. So Marlus Coutinho, I have been with First Advantage now for almost 4 years. I used to lead strategy for the American region. And now I'm leading LATAM. So very exciting, originally from Brazil. And as a good Brazilian, I'm passionate about what we call football.
Yeah. Love it. Always love a good personal fact there. So thank you so much. Ryan, no pressure, but you might have to add one as well as you introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, no pleasure, Caitlin. Thanks for having me. Ryan Nardontonia, I'm our Vice President of Compliance at First Advantage. And so the LATAM region falls under me, background screening, identity, etc. I've been with First Advantage now. It's my 5th year. I live in Philadelphia. Fun fact about me.
We didn't prep for this. I'll let everyone know. No one prepped for this.
That's the best I can do. Yeah.
Well, I think you will like on the back of me, you see something up on the wall. It does say divided household. I am a Giants fan and my fiance is an Eagles fan. So that is my fun fact, but I think a lot of people actually know that. Nope. All right. And moving on. So we have some more serious things to talk about, Ryan. So before we get into today's topic, I want to remind our audience, if you are watching live on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, if you have any questions for Marlus or Ryan throughout the episode, all you'll do is put your questions or comments in the comment section across these 3 platforms, and I will get them over to them as I see fit throughout the episode. So let's start with the news first. We're talking about Treasury sanctions and the implications. If you're not familiar, the Treasury recently sanctioned 3 financial institutions for facilitating money laundering tied to fentanyl trafficking. Ryan, I'll start with you here, and Marlus, feel free to chime in. What does this signal to financial institutions globally?
Sure. And so I think, macro environment, it signals to financial institutions that they have become a primary target to bad actors, right? And so I don't think that that's necessarily news to a lot of financial institutions, especially multinational institutions, right? Who have been following, bad actors from sanctioned states trying to gain access to their, infrastructures or other loss of credibility risk. But I think from a macro level, this really signals that there are some really nefarious actors out there.
Marlus, anything to add?
No, for sure. As Ryan mentioned, right, what the FinCEN has done is unprecedented. It shows really how serious and the steps are willing to take to go for sanctions, right, for those financial institutions involved in legal activities like money laundering. It should be a wake-up call for other financial institutions, in my view.
Yeah. So with this news, I think it's easy for us to dive into the conversation of why background screening matters. I think obviously it's a key topic for us as an organization here. So Marlus, I'll start with you on this question. Can you share how poor background screening, contributed to these recent findings?
Sure. So, the end is, if you look at these sanctions, right, those 3 banks represent about $22 billion in combined institution assets, right? These are not small institutions. They're probably doing something already, but to the point, it probably not done right. So it demonstrates how critical, important, a comprehensive employee and executive screening it is for institutions, for any institution, but a financial institution is even more critical, right? So in my view, there's a common thread, which is people-based risk. And if you don't address that with a very comprehensive background screening, you open up for risk. It is a big deal.
Yeah, and we see the same thing. And so, I know that financial institutions are really oriented toward mitigating risk, whether it's information security, data privacy, et cetera. But what we've seen, frankly, over the last year is an upswing in what, we think of as personnel risks, right? From, sanctioned country actors, money laundering. You have these really nefarious and frankly kind of developed and sophisticated frauds, right? Who are infiltrating organizations and exploiting them for criminal purposes. I mean, to put it on, frankly. Yeah.
So the follow-up question here is that we're talking about poor background screening. So now let's look to good background screening. So how is it, when it's actually done correctly, how is that going to help mitigate these kinds of risks? So again, Marlus, I'm going to come back to you first on this one.
Sure. So if you look about the institutions, right, the breakdown in compliance there, you can probably track down to an individual or a group that either had a pre-existing criminal association that went undetected, were recruited or compromised by criminal organization after they got hired, right, after they got on board. So that means they have a clear criminal records, and then after that, or lack of integrity standards for a position in financial trust, right? So, and I would say I will add a fourth one. It's they operate in an environment with insufficient ongoing monitoring. So when you think about how background check can really help mitigate, in my view, is your first line of defense. It can identify red flags before you bring those people on board. But I would say to you is the risk of not conducting background screening is complete exclusion of the financial system, reputation damage, regulatory screening, potential criminal prosecution, right, or even shareholder value destruction. In this case, of $22 billion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I mean, it's to mitigate the personnel risk, you have to mitigate exactly what Marlus is alluding to, right? And so we have a rash of these incidents that would have been mitigated by background screening, right? And so you had foreign actors from sanctioned states, right, who would not have gone through the process with a biometric facial identity scan, right? And so that person would never have gotten access to the sensitive information or the money that they transferred. Likewise, as Marlus pointed out, you have people had they implemented a criminal monitoring, it would have caught some of the preceding acts, and that person wouldn't have worked at these banks, right? And so that's really what we see. And, in response, you do have some regulatory response too, not necessarily just in Latin America, but through the Americas, right? And so you have, the SEC obviously requires specific background screening. OSFI up in Canada, they just implemented a new rule that requires specific background screening. It includes identity verification, criminal, like a national crim, the equivalent of that in Canada, monitoring, a reputation assessment, right? And so you kind of see this best practice emerging both from regulators and for institutions that have been through, right, that have gone through circumstances like this.
Yeah. And just to add to what Ryan was saying, I would add that civil litigation, global sanctions as well as employment and education verification, right? That helps you kind of look at additional risk of fraud or misrepresentation there.
Yeah. I mean, First Advantage, we gather, we have tens of thousands of customers. So we have anecdotally or otherwise a really unique perspective into what different industries are doing in their background screening. And there's none more rigorous at the moment than financial institutions.
That's right.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. One more I would add to it.
You're
Social
fine.
media.
Keep
Social
going.
media
Yeah.
would be another big one.
Well, you guys had mentioned a couple of different things, and obviously we're talking about the importance of having like that end-to-end background screening that actually works, not that, the poor type of strategy. But I'm sure there are some people watching, raising their hand, being like, well, there might be some restrictions in place, or I might be facing some roadblocks here with regional challenges, specifically in Latin America. So, Ryan, to start with you, what makes Latin America particularly challenging for background screening?
Yeah, sure. As a reminder, I can't give legal advice on here, but what I can do is I can speak to what our customers are doing, right? So what best practices have emerged? How are they navigating obstacles? Anywhere in the world, there's going to be considerations around discrimination. And it seems that what our customers have done is they've created a nexus between the position that they're hiring for and the background screening that they're conducting and how they are adjudicating their matrix, right? And so say you have someone in retail, they have access to a cash register or money, right? And so for that person, it may be relevant for them to have a financial check, right? Or a credit check, or crimes involving financial dishonesty would make that person unhireable, right? And so that seems to be the trend. That seems to be what our customers are doing. And so there's that nexus in response to discrimination. Another thing that we see, throughout the Americas and Latin America included, data privacy rules, right? And so in a lot of places, criminal history, a background screen, personal information is personal to these candidates, right? And so how do customers navigate that? What we see is that they're navigating it with very comprehensive consents, right? That they're gathering from the candidate. They're providing a lot of information up front, like what kind of data is going to be collected, where is it going to be transferred, who's going to have hands on your data, who is going to be disclosed to it, right? And then what rights do you have to the data, right? And so, at First Advantage, we accommodate what we call data subject rights requests. And so if a candidate says, I've processed my background check, now I'd like you to delete what you have. If the region allows that, we do it. And likewise, if they want to see a copy of their report and the region that they're in allows that, we do that. And so that's another thing too. There's a big data privacy push at the moment. And so I'd say those two are probably primary concerns, right? Privacy and discrimination, I think, are the two things I hear the most.
Anything to add, Marlus?
Yeah, listen, this is a big topic. In fact, we had a webinar a few months ago where we
do a whole other episode.
But we had a whole webinar actually, which we present a lot of facts about challenges and opportunities in performing a background check. So I would highly recommend our audience to check that. You probably go to fadv.com, and I think it's under blogs, but you can probably provide that on to the group.
Yes.
To our audience. But as Ryan mentioned, right, it's important to understand the culture, regulations, the dynamic of the region. For example, I'll give you a more practical example. People move a lot in Latam. So performing criminal screen beyond the borders or beyond the country hire is a very critical aspect to it, right? And we also know when you compare Latin America with a more developed economy, people change jobs more. So employment verification can be tricky, time consuming, but is necessary. So there's all kinds of in and outs of performing, I would say, screening in the region that you need to partner with a company that really understands and specialize in Latin America to be able to help you there.
Mm-hmm. So we talked a lot about, again, like the transition of, a poor background screening program to implementing one that makes sense for your organization, these challenges, these roadblocks. So let's now move into, some best practices from the two of you in regards to screening within financial services for Latin America. So Marlus, I will kick it off with you. So again, the question is, what are some best practices for implementing a strong screening program, specifically within that financial sector?
Yeah. For me, there's two folds in that, the answer there. One is the what, which I think we commented a little bit before, which is identity, right? To really help you combat fraud. So in the end of the day, you want to make sure the person that you hire really, or that you're doing a background check is really that person, and the person that shows up to the first day is the person you interview. So that digital identity is key. Criminal, and I would say, depending on where that person lived, check other countries. Civil litigation, global sanctions, employment, education verification. I think that's key, right? There are other common best practices going to be around rescreening, monitoring, and I'll add to it social media as well. Mm-hmm. And I think the other important piece is the how you do it. So I think having a centralized framework with regional flexibility to adapt to the points Ryan made before about the regional or country-specific laws, I think it's important. I think have a single technology around the countries or your region or globally connected to your applicant tracking system. I think it's another really strong best practices. If you can have one vendor that covers the region or globally for you, I think that can really drive an easier change management. So, and of course, a really strong understanding and expertise in the region. I think for me, when you talk about the what and the how, it's really a best practice there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like Marlus mentioned, custom and practice throughout Latin America is really important as well. And so, outside of the black letter law that we're looking at, so what are companies required to do? How do you mitigate risk? It's what's customary, right? And so I think having local knowledge with regional or global ability becomes important. More specifically, though, like what do I think is best practice in a background screen? And so the one thing that I'll note that all the new regulations require for financial institutions is identity. Mm-hmm. Because, in the United States, it's fingerprinting, right? In Canada, it's digital identity, facial recognition, right? And the threat that they're mitigating with that are foreign actors who want to gain access to a financial institution's money, systems, or honestly, like even a paycheck, right? And so there were some bad actors in the United States, North Korean bad actors who had gained access to a financial institution via fraudulent profile of a fraudulent person. They pretended to be someone, got a job, and then were sending money back to a sanctioned country, right? That problem would have been mitigated with an identity screen. And then it seems to again, like the really common pieces of this, of the regulatory obligations that we see around this are identity, criminal, a reputational assessment, right? Which is, you can gather that a lot of different places, social media screening, continuous monitoring, right? That's also a common requirement. That's a little unusual. I don't know if the percent of our customers that use it, but in the financial world, it's bigger. The national, they may go back a little further too. I mean, it's really the best practice that we see. I mean, not selling this, but the best practice that we see is just a really robust screening system, right? Because the reputational risk is big as well. I mean, not just money. Reputational risks for these institutions really matters,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you both are obviously mentioning a lot of things that go into a robust background screening program. So we actually got a comment on LinkedIn, which is pretty timely for what you both had just mentioned. So Marlus, I'm going to kick the question to you because I know that both of you are talking to a lot of our customers, but I'd like for you to answer this question. But obviously, Ryan, if you have anything, chime in. So this person is saying that obviously background screening, a robust program, seems critical, but how do you balance balance thorough checks with a smooth customer experience. So let's look at that though in a lens of a customer experience, but also a applicant or a candidate experience as well.
For sure. So for me, it goes back to technology integration, right? So you want to minimize data entry. You really want to give a really great experience from different steps. I mean, we didn't talk about drugs or physical checks, which is common in Latin America as well. But if you have one experience for the candidates where everything in one platform, you minimize data entry, you leverage a lot of the data from the ATS. You really think about, hey, this person is new. Their experience reflects on the hiring company. So you want to make sure it's smooth, it's easy, simple. But that's how you leverage technology to make that seamless.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, anything to add?
Yeah, I'll hop in. I previously mentioned sort of like the privacy considerations throughout Latin America. And so those are bolstered with a process like that, right? Like if you can avoid sending personal information via email, right? You can do it via ATS. If you can avoid having to disclose other PI through the process, if you self-contain it, it's better, and so it supports us from a privacy perspective as well.
Yeah.
And I'll add to it, right? So we have a very robust mobile experience for candidates. So we know everybody has a smartphone today. So be able to do that in a very easy way on your mobile, I think that really drives that smooth customer or candidate experience, if you will.
Yeah. Well, great response and great question. So I will pause for a second and let our audience know if you are tuning in live right now. If you do have any questions, now's your time because I've asked all my questions at this point. So now's your time. Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. If you have them, put them in the comment section and I'll get them over as we close out the episode today. So as we do, march towards that closing of today's episode, I would love to get final thoughts from the two of you on everything that we discussed. So Ryan, I will start with you on final thoughts for today.
Yeah, I think my final thoughts are that regretfully, I think financial institutions have entered an era where the threats have become more nefarious, right? Fentanyl, drug trafficking, sanctioned countries gaining access to the institution, right? This isn't where we started, right? I mean, when I started in background screening and in compliance, the threats were not those, right? And so we've really entered this era where the threats can be very big and very sinister. I'm proud, right, to be at First Advantage and to be able to mitigate this, to keep our institutions safe, to keep employees safe and keep bad actors out of these institutions. I mean, it's really, I gather a lot of altruism from that, right? And so I think that's my parting thought. And that identity has become critical, right? In the era of remote work and these threats, that really seems to be where we're going.
Yeah. Thank you. Marlus, final thoughts from you.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I know we specifically talk about those, the news in Mexico right now involving 3 banks. Ryan mentioned North Korea. I mean, there was something also happened a couple of weeks ago in Brazil where an employee sold his credential to hackers, which end up, stealing $100 million from the central bank, right? So it's crazy. You can't make those things up, right? So I think what we're seeing today, to Ryan's point, is there is an existent threat that you don't hire the right people and you're not screening posed to financial institutions, right? It's a high risk environment today. So I cannot stress enough how comprehensive screening solutions can really address the human factor that enables those compliance failures, if you will, right? So in my view is today First Advantage perform. So if you take the top 15 US banks, we do screening for the top 11, right? So we have about, if you take the 15 banks, about 75% of they use First Advantage. So we understand that well. We understand this vertical extremely well. We have the opportunity to share best practices and so forth. So I think the choice is clear. companies should understand that invest in a comprehensive personal screening now, or the risk of becoming the next, Treasury Department headlines or the next headline in the news. I think it's clear.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Very clear. Well, we don't have any further questions coming in from the audience. I think you guys covered everything to a T, so that's probably why. But listen, the conversation does not stop here. You can get in touch, with Ryan and Marlus at any time. You can contact us through our corporate LinkedIn page. You can visit our website at fadv.com, where you can find multiple assets. I do know on LinkedIn, my colleague did put a link to the webinar that Marlus did mention. We will also get those links uploaded to our Facebook and YouTube as well, along with the blog that Marlus mentioned as well. But again, fadv.com, our corporate LinkedIn account, you will always find the latest and greatest, and you can also reach out to us at any time. So with that being said, I want to thank you both so much for joining me today. You were absolutely great. It was a pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Our pleasure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. And I will see everyone on the next episode of FA Live. We've got a nice busy summer coming ahead and an early fall. I've got so many episodes lined up. I'm excited. But again, thank you so much for tuning in live. And if you are watching on demand, thank you for watching as well. So with that, on behalf of all three of us, thank you and goodbye. And we'll catch you on the next episode.
There you go.